Hello and welcome to a Monday Night Football Showdown breakdown. Steelers Colts. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined by Gary Hartman and Cody Main. Gary, happy Thanksgiving, belated. How's it going?
Yeah, you too, my friend. It's good. Well, I was just saying, Cody, it's okay. I had my worst GPP week of the season yesterday by a long shot. So reeling from that, but all in all, was a good weekend. Besides just losing money.
Oh no, we can get into that a little bit. Maybe Cody, how's it going?
I'm good. I need to get this show on the road because I don't know if you guys know, but Matt Rule was just announced the Nebraska Cornhuskers' next head coach, and his introductory press conference is taking place in the next 30 minutes or so. So let's get this thing moving.
God, Matt Rule, what could go wrong?
How are you feeling? You like that hire?
I'm pumped, man. I'm pumped. I know the college game is a whole lot different than the NFL game. Yes. He should be an upgrade over what we've been dealing with the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Tonight we have, I think, actually a kind of interesting game. I haven't really gotten to take a real long look, only watched Kenny Pickett for an entire game this year. I'm excited to do that because I think Kenny Pickett has it in him. It has not been pretty for the most part this year for Kenny Pickett. Also, we have Matt Ryan back in the saddle. We have a healthy Jonathan Taylor here. It's a game where I think people obviously are excited about JT and maybe Freiermuth, and beyond that have a lot of questions about a lot of these players. How do you see this game from a macro perspective, Cody?
Yeah, from a macro perspective, when I started writing this thing up and looking at the price tags, the two that really stood out from the very beginning were Jonathan Taylor, Pat Freiermuth, as you mentioned, and then to a lesser degree, given the injury situation in the Steelers' backfield, Najee Harris as well. But as I'm kind of going through building, I'm finding myself landing on these quarterbacks that, you know, they lack the sex appeal. They lack the intrigue and the inspiration to get into your lineups in most main slates. But I think on this particular showdown slate, where they're priced and given the, you know, what I expect to be their projected ownership in tournaments, I think we can make an interesting bull case for the passing attacks on either side, and especially given the price tags. You mentioned the Kenny Pickett stuff. I don't know if Kenny Pickett is a good NFL quarterback at this point in time, but I think that he has paths to scoring fantasy points. He's been a willing runner, been a willing scrambler. The Steelers team wants to pass a little bit. So I know that ownership in general on these ugly slates with a 39-point total and two uninspiring offenses is generally going to lend itself to a ton of running back exposure, a ton of DST and kicker exposure. I'm kind of trying to talk myself into getting contrarian with these passing attacks.
Just from a data perspective, Kenny Pickett has actually been fine from accuracy perspective, but scheme problems. I mean, I know people in Pittsburgh hate Matt Canada, and I'm starting to think maybe that's well-deserved. We can talk more about that here in a second. From an injury perspective, Jaylen Warren is going to miss this game. Cody referred to the role that Najee Harris is going to have tonight. Also a sneaky injury, Kylan Granson, we're not expecting to play. They listed him doubtful. Big-time PSM stuff going. Marley Cox, Jelani Woods as the two tight ends here. From a roster construction perspective, Cody, what are you thinking on what the field is going to do here?
Yeah, we're going to see a ton of 3-3 ownership. As you can see there, 44.3% projected. Now, generally you see in the large field tournaments with all of the Opto Bros in there, they will be forcing some of these 2-4, 4-2, 5-1, 1-5 type stuff. So it will pull a little bit from the 3-3. But I suspect in most small field single entry type contests, you're going to see a lot of 3-3. You can talk yourselves into a couple of options on either side, but neither one of these offenses is one that we really look at and think onslaught. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of 1-5 or 5-1 in either direction. You might get a little bit of 2-4, 4-2 action, but I think the overwhelming consensus here on tonight's slate is 3-3.
Yeah, you know, my take was initially that this would be even lower. Like the 5-1 and the 1-5s would be even lower. And maybe in smaller field stuff, like people that are hand building, I'm not sure anybody's going to hand build 5-1 or 1-5 naturally. Do you agree with that, Cody?
Yeah, that tracks too. And like what the model's looking at is it's like you'll see some of the value that we'll get into on both sides really. And so the model's looking at that and thinking like we can jam in these Jelani Woods types, these Steven Sims types. We'll talk through some of these guys and how much they can really be played in tournaments. But that's why you're seeing a little bit more of the 5-1, 1-5 than you would even expect. And you're right, in small field hand-built style tournaments, it's going to be really low.
Okay, Gary, let's get to the quarterbacks. I kind of got into Kenny Pickett a little bit already here. Matt Ryan, I think we know the deal on Matt Ryan at this point. Is he good? No. Is he an upgrade on Sam Ehlinger? Yes. Are they more willing to put more on his plate? Yes. That said, I still think it'll be a run centric game plan from the Colts here tonight. We do get discounts. I mean, normally quarterbacks are up 10K plus. We do get a little bit of a discount here. Pickett 9,800. Matt Ryan 9,600. Gary, how do you think about handling the quarterback position tonight?
Yeah, I second Cody's sentiment on Pickett. I think that he could be an interesting a target here tonight that I think the field might be a little bit scared to go to just from the underlying, you see the 3 to 8 touchdown interception ratio and everything like that. But, game script might work in his favor a little bit. We'll see there. As far as Ryan's concerned, I think at current ownership, I really like him. And I think I'd be targeting him for most of my cash stuff. I mean, the matchup is really, really strong. Pittsburgh's been a pass funnel all season. He's cheaper than Pickett. We've seen, and I know this was pretty much pre-Saturday, but we saw a 30-point game in there in week 6. We saw him get up to almost 23 DraftKings points 2 weeks ago against Vegas. Like, this is as good of a matchup as either of those two matchups are concerned. So I get we kind of have our concerns as far as pace, maybe the 39 over-under is concerned. But, if Pittsburgh is able to successfully slow down Jonathan Taylor, I wouldn't be surprised to see a pivot in the game plan to the pass game quick, especially when you look on the on-paper matchup being a good one. So I'm really into Matt Ryan here and the pass targets here for Indy.
Yeah, I agree with Gary. I think it's easier to throw on the Steelers than it is to run on them. That said, we've had offensive line problems from the Colts this year, and TJ Watt got back and looked very good last week for the Steelers. Cody, what do you think about Pickett and Ryan tonight? How are you going to handle them?
Yeah, everything from a matchup perspective kind of points to the direction of Matt Ryan. Obviously not going to add anything on the ground, but this is a situation, at least, pre-Minkah Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt, this defense definitely sets up as more of a pass funnel. They face the league's 5th highest pass rate over expectation, and they're giving up explosive pass plays at a pretty impressive clip. So it wanted to get me excited about Matt Ryan, and like some of the smaller field stuff that I'll be playing, and I know some of you guys are playing as well, is I think you're going to see Matt Ryan offer like direct 1-for-1 leverage off of Jonathan Taylor, where Matt Ryan's ownership might come down closer to 40%. And when we get to the running back position, we might see JT's ownership come up closer to like 80. So if you give me that type of spread on ownership, I don't necessarily think JT should be like a 2-to-1 favorite to outscore Matt Ryan. And then I can get myself onto some more of these unique Indianapolis pass catchers and kind of play it that way. With that said, from thinking back to the Kenny Pickett stuff, like the way that he's going to score fantasy points, I think is a little bit cleaner, though the matchup is a little bit more difficult. He is willing to scramble. They are designing a few rushing attempts for him a game. And this offense, I do think under Canada, while there are schematic issues, I think they're more willing to pass even in a tougher matchup. So you have a little bit of a higher pass rate. You have a quarterback that's a little bit more willing to run. And I think the base case for Kenny Pickett is a little bit better than it is for Matt Ryan.
Okay. The question of the slate is going to be how to handle Jonathan Taylor, I think. I mean, when Deion Jackson was out, that was when I was like, man, this is the freaking nuts for Jonathan Taylor. I mean, he had no one. They traded Naheem Hines. Deion Jackson got hurt, and Jonathan Taylor played almost every snap. Last week, we saw Deion Jackson get back in there, and not that it's a lot, but it's enough to make it so that Jonathan Taylor is not like a 90+% of the snaps guy. He still ran a route on 60+% of the dropbacks last week, even with Deion Jackson back there. So that was a really good sign, I think, for Jonathan Taylor in the pass game. Anything above 65% or so for running back and routes per dropback is really, really good. Gary, we have 70% total ownership, 19% captain on Jonathan Taylor tonight. Certainly the best big play threat in the game. Like, Jonathan Taylor makes these 60-yard runs, I think, at a rate that is going to break the slate a decent amount. What do you think about JT at these ownerships?
Yeah, I think the best thing that happened to JT, other than Naheem Hines getting traded, was Jeff Saturday coming in and clearly, as a former offensive lineman, just wanting to pound the rock and knowing that they had a guy that was in the running for Offensive Player of the Year last year and was maybe being misused a little bit up until this point. So, you really have to like the role. You have to like the workload. The matchup is fine. It's not terrible. It's not the best. Obviously, Pittsburgh does have a talented front seven. I think the way I would be handling it is coming in a little bit under the field while making sure I have plenty of exposure and probably still locking him in cash. But in tournaments, I think that I would be leaning into this pass game more. And I think that's, you should, if you want to take a stand, I think leaning one way or another, like coming in way over on Michael Pittman and Matt Ryan stacks over the 70% on Jonathan Taylor. And I can still come in with 50, 55% Taylor and making sure I have that exposure. But I'd rather take the chance as a direct way to get leverage here and play into the matchup of things a little bit. I don't think Taylor's a bad play at all. It's a lot of ownership, though, for when the best way to attack this team is through the air. So I'm going to lean into the matchup stuff a little bit here.
Yeah, and Deion Jackson is like at 5K, would be one of those pay ups so bad that it's good, maybe. I mean, Deion Jackson's not going to play a lot, maybe like 20% of the snaps. He ran 9 routes last week. Can Deion Jackson get there? Maybe 5K would be a lot to spend there. So, Cody, what do you think about handling JT? I do think, again, that's the most important part, one of the most important parts of the slate. And then also so bad that it's good on Deion Jackson.
Yeah, I wish I could offer a differing opinion from Gary's, but I'm kind of in the same boat here. I think that JT can fail to crack optimal or winning lineups in 2 ways, and we can attack those in 2 ways. Maybe the Colts offense just fails as a whole. And in those situations, I would want to just be heavier on the Steelers side of things, where maybe I have a 2-4 with 4 Steelers, or even a 1-5 with 5 Steelers coming back. Or he could fail because the Colts passing attack is so dominant, or is at least good enough to keep him out of the end zone multiple times, things of that nature. So I'm kind of playing it from 2 sides, where I think you can avoid Jonathan Taylor in lineups where you have a heavy Steelers approach, and you can also avoid him in other lineups where you are heavy on the Colts, but are playing more into the passing attack narrative. And I think I'm going to play into that a little bit on this slate, because it is enough of a concern with Deion Jackson back. He did play 100% of the 2-minute snaps last week, got in on some long down and distance stuff. If they continue to do that and eat into Jonathan Taylor's, pass catching role, he really needs to be efficient as a rusher and find the end zone. And maybe at that price tag, maybe find the end zone multiple times, which he can certainly do. But in some of the stuff that I think I'll be playing, where he's going to be closer to 80% than 70, I think it's just a fade that I'll be willing to take.
So I just wanted to bring up all the players here on the projection table just to make a point. You don't see players clear every other player by 4+ points very often in a game. And it's normally quarterback. It's normally like Lamar or Josh Allen or Hurts when that happens. You don't see it at running back. And so, yeah, you can go for JT fade, but man, he is so much better than everybody else in this game. So I don't know, man. I think it's a pretty scary fade. And if I was playing cash, I would probably, I would almost certainly be on JT.
Yeah, to that point, I think JT is definitely a lock in cash, and to just provide a different perspective. Gary's talked about this too on other slates, like with Derrick Henry and some of these other running backs. Like you could go for overweight stands on him specifically at captain. Maybe you come in around the field on his total exposure or even less, but maybe you've got 50% of that exposure at captain, and just hope you get that JT eruption. So I think that's a kind of a different way to play it if you want to be in on JT and still get leverage on the field.
Somebody in chat, shout out to Victor. He said, can you guys put your Twitter info in the description so we can follow you? Yes. Thought you never asked, Victor. We did it. At Adam Levitan, at CMain7, at GHartman314. If you're trying to win in fantasy, you got to be on the Twitter machine for sure. Okay. On the other side, with Jaylen Warren out, I mean, they're going for it with Najee. And this is not going to be their most efficient way to win, right? Because we know Najee Harris is not very good. We know the offensive line is not very good. We know the scheme is not very good. But I've actually played Najee on some main slates lately because, man, I mean, they feature him in the pass game. They feature him in the run game. He's around the goal line. Yeah, he sucks. No one wants to play him, but the dude's role is awesome. It's kind of the same way I feel about James Conner. I think James Conner sucks and the scheme is awful. He's playing like 99, 97% of the snaps. It's kind of similar to what's going on with Najee here. So I don't think Najee is good. Field is obviously on it to some degree, 58% total ownership here, 13% captain. Gary, what do you think about Steelers running backs tonight?
I agree with you. So last year in Najee's rookie year, I was into Najee, and he still wasn't efficient, but the guy was catching 8 balls a week, it seemed like. Once Jaylen Warren started getting more onto the scene here, Najee Harris has been off my radar, including last week, which was just a mistake at 5,500 on the main slate at 3%. That was always going to be a good tournament play at that combination. And shout out to you. But without Jaylen Warren around, this is definitely a guy to attack, regardless of matchup, because the floor is significantly raised by 2 things. You mentioned it, just snap share and workload. But also, I think the check down stuff, especially with the rookie quarterback, especially not being taken off the field in those downs now without Jaylen Warren, makes for a really high floor play. Someone that I would consider using in cash as well. And the 58% doesn't scare me too much. I think where Cody was mentioning the Taylor thing, where I think a way to make sure I'd get my Taylor exposure is coming in over at captain. I think here with Najee, I'd be more interested in the flex spot for him as a floor play. But I think Najee's in a good spot here, even in the just whatever matchup.
Cody, I don't think we can play any other Steelers guys. I mean, $200 Benny Snell, I get, could make a lot work, but my God, that would be super thin, at least for me. What do you think about Snell and the lottos and anything else on Najee?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, if you're MMEing the lottos or the $5 stuff and you want to have some exposure to these really cheap, low owned guys that can differentiate your lineups, you can keep Benny Snell in a pool. But we'll talk about some of these pass catchers that I think are also really cheap, stone minimum guys on the pass catching side that make more sense. So no, I'm not going to Benny Snell. And you know, you guys summed up the Najee Harris stuff pretty well.
All right. Wide receiver position for Pittsburgh is so interesting because Deontay Johnson's opportunity is so amazing. Dude remains elite at earning targets. His yards per target, I don't think people realize, and I don't, first of all, I don't think yards per target is like the best stat. Like it can be really noisy. There can be a lot of issues with yards per target. But Deontay Johnson this year is at like 5.3 or something like that, which is so outrageously low. It's like mind boggling. Now, I think there's room for regression there. Like Deontay Johnson cannot average 5.3 yards per target for entire season, but it's been 11 games and he's doing it so far. It's very, very scary. On the other hand, George Pickens has been out there a ton. Everybody sees George Pickens makes big plays. I think he would have been a first-round talent, a first-round pick for sure. Maybe the first wide receiver taken in the draft if he never got hurt in college, but he has not been earning targets at nearly as high a rate. With Claypool out, it's been a little bit better. And then I'm embarrassed to admit that I did play Steven Sims, I think it was 2 weeks ago, on a main slate tournament team. The first game, I think after Claypool left, I was like, oh, baby, we're cooking with Steve Sims in a slot role here at Stone Minimum. He has failed miserably to earn targets since Claypool has been gone, but he is only 200 here. I'll start with you, Cody. Steelers wide receivers. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, at the top, this almost feels like last night's situation with different names, given the fact that we have kind of the incumbent with Deontay Johnson at 7,600, who we can liken to Alan Lazard a little bit. The field is not enamored with this guy. They think this guy sucks, and they're probably right in assuming that. George Pickens, on the other hand, while he hasn't been scoring touchdowns to the degree that Christian Watson has, it's a guy that everyone is excited about. And I think we could easily see ownership flip here where the young, the budding star is the guy that ends up catching more ownership, leaving the guy that has actually proven an ability to earn targets at least at a high level to this point of his career is going to come in a little bit under-owned. I wrote in the article that I'm basically letting ownership projections dictate my exposure to the Steelers wide receivers. I just want the guy that I think is going to be lowest owned if I'm playing into this. And I think that we have it projected where it might flip. I think Deontay Johnson might come in lower owned. And if that's the case, I at least want the guy that I know is going to be out there earning targets. Although he might not do a ton with them, I want those opportunities. So at the top, I prefer Deontay Johnson, though. Once we get to the tight end position, I think there's a better overall pass catcher on the Steelers side that excites me a little bit more.
I prefer Deontay Johnson too. And I think the ownership, like we might be slightly off. I think it's going to be close. Like I think we can say it's going to be close between Pickens and Deontay. I also prefer Deontay just for raw volume and some regression on his yards per target this year. And then Steve Sims, before we go to Indy, Steve Sims, $200. He's going to be out there in some form of the slot role. Cody, what do you think about him?
You know, we've really had some slam dunk value on recent slates. We had Eli Mitchell back on that 49ers slate when he was coming back off IR at 200 was an obvious slam dunk. Trey McBride on the last Arizona Showdown slate, he was basically a slam dunk. Didn't necessarily get there in the box score, but I thought he was a very obvious cash game value play. Steven Sims is kind of in that same vicinity of like making enough work at $200 that he makes sense in cash, and I think can be played in cash, despite the fact that he's going to offer a bunch of zeros out there, but he just kind of makes everything work around him. So because of that, it's probably going to boost his ownership a little bit in tournaments. And I'd kind of want to steer clear of a guy that really can't earn targets and is only going to be on the field for, 40% of the team's routes. I would avoid that in tournaments, but I'm kind of leaning into playing it in cash, which kind of feels like a mistake, but I'm having a hard time finding somebody else make everything else work.
Yeah. I mean, he's like 175 pounds is Steve Sims. He played 28 in the 2 games since Claypool's been gone. He had 28 slot snaps, 19 slot snaps. He's not going to earn very many targets, but yeah, he'll be out there a reasonable amount. As we go to Indy, somebody who's going to be out there more than a reasonable amount is Michael Pittman, who will be out there for roughly 100% of the routes this week. We also have Paris Campbell, who was obviously a controversial, but I think it worked out cash play. I guess that was 1 or 2 weeks ago on the main slate. And we have Alec Pierce, whose underlying stats, and people might be surprised how close we have the projection here between Paris and Pierce. Underlying stats on Pierce have been very, very good. Gary, what do you think about Colts wide receivers here?
Yeah, I think all three are actually really good plays at current ownership. Yeah, you mentioned the Pierce thing. I think it's super interesting. I mean, he had 8 targets last week. You get a nice discount off of Campbell, and I wouldn't really want to play those two guys together too much. I think you could, especially in Matt Ryan captain stuff. But I prefer to play Pittman with one of those guys as my doubles here if I were to do it. So I think Pierce with a little bit less ownership and the discount on Paris is interesting, although it's hard to ignore how solid Paris Campbell has been really for the second half of the season, especially over the last couple of weeks since Matt Ryan's been back under center. He's been earning targets in a real way, has a couple touchdowns. So I like all these guys. I've already mentioned being kind of over on the Indy pass game in general. I think Pittman's price, as Cody mentioned in his article, at the 5-figure price, I think is going to keep that ownership somewhat in check. So we're seeing under 50% on who is clearly the top receiver on the team here. I think Pittman could be in for a really, really big day. So I'd come in over on all three of these guys while comfortably playing doubles and perhaps triples if you ever want to go to an onslaught here. But I prefer the doubles with Pittman and one of the other two.
Okay. Yeah. The doubles are interesting. Ryan captain with a double or with 2 pass catchers, or one of the pass catchers with one other pass catcher and Ryan in flex.
Yep.
Let's go to tight end, because I think tight end is very, very interesting here. Everyone's excited about Pat Freiermuth. Shout out Penn State. What a stud Pat Freiermuth is, put on earth to score touchdowns. I actually think that people's most exciting click in the Steelers pass game is going to be Freiermuth. Like, we have 39.5. I could see that rising for sure. I saw a bunch of people betting overs on Freiermuth props and stuff like that. We weren't really showing it over there. And then on the other side, you have no Kylan Granson tonight. It'll be Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods, 2 really big, strong pass catchers that can score in the red zone and are very cheap. Cody, think we could be light on Freiermuth ownership here. And what do you think about tight end stuff?
I think you're 100% right on Freiermuth. And I think if we're light, which I assume we are, I'm probably going to go ahead and bump that post-show closer to 50%. I think it's going to end up pulling from Deontay, pulling from George Pickens, and even pulling from the other side at 6,800, pulling from Paris Campbell a little bit, which may make those options better tournament plays as well in their own right. Claypool's role has been pretty sick since Claypool's been what was traded. 29.7% target share, 32.0% air yard share. You mentioned a guy that just scores touchdowns, and now he gets a matchup against a Colts defense that has been very good against perimeter and slot wide receivers, but has been a little bit more vulnerable to the tight end position. So I think everything kind of aligns for Pat Freiermuth. I don't necessarily love rostering tight ends in cash, but right now, like the lineup that I'm looking at has Pat Freiermuth at captain to allow me to fit everything else that I want to fit. Right. So I don't think Freiermuth is necessarily a bad cash play. Just be aware that, we're light right now. We'll make those adjustments after the show, but his ownership is going to be outsized in tournaments, I think.
Yeah. And the Colts guys are pretty cheap. I think people might overreact to Kylan Granson's real role here, though. I mean, they can just slide in Jelani Woods to Granson's role. I don't think it changes Mo Alley Cox's role very much. That said, I think both are really talented guys. I'd be willing to play Jelani and Mo Alley for sure, even in smaller field stuff. I think obviously prefer Mo Alley if you have the money for it. Gary, any thoughts on tight ends?
Yeah, I also prefer Mo Alley here. Definitely, benefited from the lack of Kylan Granson. We know Mo Alley can be a touchdown scorer, right? I mean, as you always mentioned, pops off the PSM. We've seen it happen once or twice earlier this season. Jelani's still the rookie. Rookie tight ends do struggle historically in fantasy, although I think it's been a little bit better this year. Definitely prefer Mo Alley if you have the money, but I think both guys are definitely in play across the board. I wouldn't play them together personally. I know Cody usually lets all those rules kind of be open, but I wouldn't play them together.
Den notes that he's bricked up for Mo Alley Cox. So just sprinkle that into the model if you can. Okay, I do want to get to your questions, but defense and kicker here in projected low scoring game is often popular. Cody, what do you think about strategy before defense and kicker tonight?
When I ran ownership, I was kind of expecting it to come in a little bit higher across the board, maybe closer to 30% on the DSTs and 25% plus on the kickers. But I was actually kind of surprised to see it come in where it did, and where it's at. I think they're playable options in small and large field tournaments. you'll be surprised to hear me say this after, what I've been doing and what I've been touting the last couple of weeks for Showdown Cash, but I don't think I'm in on the kickers tonight because I don't think we necessarily need the salary relief given the pricing of the quarterbacks, given the pricing of some of the other options around them. So because they're not in play for cash, that leads me to believe they might come in a little bit under-owned in tournaments. And I kind of like this group of 4 options here in tournaments, given the offensive line woes for both teams and given the quarterback woes for both teams. I think both defenses make a ton of sense.
On the kicker side, I mean, a lot of people probably never heard of either one of these kickers. And we've talked about, the Tucker stuff and everybody wants to play all the kickers that they know. I don't think anybody knows these 2 guys, which could keep ownership down there as well. All right. We have about 5 minutes here. We can get to as many questions as we can. Joey says, Cody, are you going back to kicker captain? I'm not sure what he's referring to here, Cody. Did you play a captain kicker recently that I missed?
Yeah, there's been a slew of I don't know, the last 5 or 6 slates where the only way I could get the cash team to work is to play the captain kicker stuff. And that allowed me to get the quarterbacks and the running back pass catchers that I wanted to have in flex. And it's worked to varying degrees, but we had like a 12-point performance from Jake Elliott last night, which was very nice. And, as much fun as it is to make fun of the captain kicker stuff, I think it's actually pretty sharp in cash.
Jason says, what about completely fading Jonathan Taylor in the flex and only playing him in captain while going overweight on the passing game GPPs? So I think one thing that you need here, if you do that, would be a big pass catching role for JT, which is not out of the question. Or maybe I'm not thinking about it right. Gary, any thoughts here on Jason's question?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think in order for that to happen, is from a kind of larger portfolio perspective, you do need a pass catching floor, if you will. But I do think it's one way to, as Cody was kind of mentioning before, that I like to attack kind of these alpha running backs that are going to get outsized in ownership, is to do what Jason is talking about here, where maybe I'd come in at 30% captain, but only 55% total or something like that, where I'm coming in under the field in flex, but over on captain. So I'm making sure if those Taylor explosion games do happen, I'm getting exposure to that. While I want to, where in my flex spots and in general, I want to be over on the pass game. So Jason, the way you're thinking about it is the way I do want to play it. Yes.
Okay. All right. One more from Jason here. Max 1 on Pickett stacks with Johnson and Pickens. Max 2 on Ryan stacks. What do you think about Pickett doubles? I guess is part of the question here. Cody, can we play Pickett doubles? If they don't include Freiermuth, I actually think they might be a little bit under-owned, that combo. What do you think?
Yeah, that's one way to play it. It's really tough with like these condensed pass catching cores like you have in Pittsburgh, where there's really only 3 guys, and then maybe you can extend it out to Steven Sims. But like the doubles that I love running out with captain quarterback are the teams like the Chiefs, who have like 8 pass catchers who can realistically catch a couple of balls or score touchdowns. What you mentioned is the way that I would play it. I think if you want to play a captain Pickett double, the way to do it and be unique, if you're talking about large field tournaments, is to avoid Freiermuth. So like captain Pickett with Deontay and Pickens, and just hoping that boxes out Freiermuth is one way to do it and still be unique.
Got a question about Benny Snell. So yeah, Jaylen Warren only played, I believe it was like 3 snaps last week before he got hurt. And in the game, Benny Snell still only played 3 snaps. Like, I think they came into the year wanting Najee Harris to be the full-time guy, the bell cow, and Jaylen Warren just played well enough to the point where they were like, we have to play this guy. I don't think they feel that way about Benny Snell. Now, that said, listen, man, it's the running back position. There's more injuries than wide receiver in-game injuries. If you get an in-game injury to Najee Harris, Benny Snell is going to smash. So I don't hate the idea of Benny Snell over Sims as the punt. They're both $200. Cody, any thoughts there on Snell versus Sims as the 200 guy?
Yeah, I mean, I will say to that point, it's rare that we get a stone minimum RB2 who, actually has a real projection that's going to come with 3% ownership. I think it's coming with 3% ownership for good reason, because I agree with what you're saying from a baseline perspective. Is Jaylen Warren just played so well throughout camp, throughout preseason, and throughout the early part of the season that he just carved out a role because they couldn't keep him off the field. I don't think they feel that way about Benny Snell, but you get a week of practice where he probably wasn't taking any snaps the week prior, comes in with the injury, doesn't play much. Now has a week of practice under his belt as the RB2. It is possible that he plays more in cash. I still think I'm leaning with the quote unquote safety of Steven Sims, although that's not safe. But like I want a guy that's going to be out there for 40% plus snaps, not or 40% plus routes, not a guy that just ran or just played 4 snaps the week prior.
Yeah. What about Gunner? Because like he's 200 also. He caught 3 targets last week. I think played 40% of offensive snaps as well. And I'm assuming he's still returning kicks too. So you could like throw that as a little bit of a tiebreaker with Pittsburgh defense type of things. I don't know, I maybe prefer him.
Okay. Yeah. The Gunner stuff, we only have Gunner 0.5 points behind Steven Sims. I do not think that would be crazy at all. We remember Gunner from the team preseason days, though. My God, I got talked into playing Gunner on a preseason slate like 3 years ago, which cost me a fortune. This freaking guy on the Patriots was like a cornerback, like return man, and it was just an absolute disaster. He's been on my shit list ever since then. But yeah, I don't know, Cody. Any thoughts on Gunner versus Steve Sims?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the underlying stuff, it looks like since the Claypool trade, they've played about the same amount. As crazy as this is to say, I think Steven Sims is a better NFL target earner than Gunnar Olszewski. So I don't know, man. They're so close in projection, and I'm hoping I can find my way onto a team that I don't need to go to these guys. But like the other options from value perspective is Jelani Woods. I don't feel that confident in Jelani Woods. And then if not there, it's going up to the kind of the 4K range with these kickers and some of these other options that make me sacrifice some of the projected floor and ceiling of these 9K plus options that I'm enamored with. So I still think I prefer Sims from a baseline, but maybe I'll find a team that I don't need to play anyone in this range.
Last one we're going to do here, FanDuel thoughts. So again, the reason for you guys who are new, the reason we do not talk as much about FanDuel is because we just don't have 2 reasons. We don't have the data on it. You cannot download CSVs. So we cannot go in there and figure out what works and what doesn't like we can on DraftKings. They just don't give us the data on the teams and what everybody played, et cetera, et cetera. Second, we don't think the game is very beatable on FanDuel because of the number of dupes. In other words, they don't make you pay more for your MVP, and therefore it creates a ton of lineups that are the same. It's really, really hard to come up with unique teams on FanDuel. And when that's the case, it's really hard to win. I mean, if anybody's winning long-term on FanDuel, one game, I would be surprised, and we still don't really recommend people play that. But if you are, Cody, any overarching FanDuel thoughts for this slate?
Yeah, Pat Freiermuth looks equally underpriced over there as well, and especially on a site where touchdowns are going to be more important to the overall scoring. I think Freiermuth is a fantastic play. Some of the same plays that we talked about on DraftKings make a ton of sense over there as well with JT and Najee. Pittman, if you want to take kind of a contrarian angle, is $13,000 over there, which is $500 cheaper than Najee, is cheaper than both quarterbacks. I think Pittman is an interesting play there where, touchdowns make sense for him as well. And George Pickens is probably going to come in with low ownership over there too. He's 11.5. He's $500 more expensive than Deontay Johnson, is more expensive than Freiermuth. I think you could get really nice ownership on Pickens in tournaments.
If you have not tried ETR yet, I promise you it will never be cheaper than it is during our Black Friday sale. Today is the last day for the Black Friday sale, $4.99 to try ETR for the next ETR NFL for the next 7 days, 1 month, $39.99. This sale expires tonight, never to be heard from again until maybe next Thanksgiving. We'll see. All right. It is time for everyone's favorite portion of the program, the flag plants. Gary, I'll give you the honors.
Oh, baby. All right. Obviously, at this point, I want to be attacking this Indy passing game tonight. I want to go to one of these tight ends, I think, but I don't know how to choose between them. So I'm just going to kind of go right past that. But I love playing both of them. And so I think I'm going to go to Alec Pierce here. I think the rookie has been really, really strong. You get to save a lot of money there. Maybe the box score outputs haven't matched some of the underlying stuff, as you mentioned, but the projection is solid. The price is solid. And I could just see him, he had 8 targets last week. I could see him doing a little bit more with that tonight in a really good matchup, especially where, because Paris Campbell has been producing, I think we already know that whatever limited talent Pittsburgh does have in their secondary, they'll be focusing their attention on Pittman, maybe a little bit more on Campbell. And I just think Pierce can get lost through the shuffle a little bit tonight to a solid game in that mid-tier.
Look, man, Pierce ran more routes than Paris Campbell did last week, period. And that's not everything. Earning targets is means a lot. Pierce earned targets. He hasn't been that efficient with them. I think Pierce is an awesome tournament play too. If people aren't like completely virgining out and just looking at box scores, they would think that Paris Campbell is like a no doubt slam dunk over Alec Pierce. Obviously, we don't have it that way in the projections because we think Alec Pierce has a pretty good chance here to outscore Paris. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, talking through the slate with you guys, I'm feeling fairly confident that ownership is going to get steamed on probably the best Steelers pass catcher, maybe the best pass catcher overall in this game, with Pat Freiermuth maybe coming closer to 50, 55% in some of the smaller field tournaments that I'll be playing. That leads me to believe, with shiny new toy George Pickens still available at $200 cheaper, Deontay Johnson at 7,600 is going to be very underowned on this slate relative to his ability to earn targets. He still leads this team in target share, air yard share, red zone target share, any opportunity metric you want to look at, it belongs to Deontay Johnson. I know he hasn't been good with the targets that he's gotten. I think, like you said, that could regress a little bit. He could just get lucky as well. Give me Deontay Johnson at 7,600 in tonight's slate.
Okay. Well, I had two choices here. You guys know I'm going down narrative street, consulting with my proprietary models, and the choices are the shout out Penn State model, Pat Freiermuth, or the PSM Marley Cox. Sounds like the entire field, the entire world is going to be on Pat Freiermuth, and therefore I'm going to go to Mo Alley Cox. I think with Kylan Granson out doesn't make a huge difference, but gives you a little bit more chance from Raleigh Cox at 3,600 here to be the salary saver that you need. What you really need from Raleigh Cox is to beat the kickers and the defenses, who are just a little bit more expensive than him. And if he scores a touchdown, he's really likely to do so. We saw that one massive game from Raleigh Cox this year. This is the kind of stuff on Showdown. Like, I would never, ever in a million years consider Raleigh Cox on a main slate. This is the kind of stuff on Showdown that I think you have to consider at a minimum, and accept that, yeah, the base projection is only 5 points at 3,600. That's not very good. Raleigh Cox has red zone equity where he can actually break the slate at a cheap number. All right. That is going to do it for this Showdown breakdown. Appreciate you all being here. Take advantage of the Black Friday sale if you have not tried ETR yet. Let me flash up this promo one more time, because honestly, the guys worked hard on the graphic, and we're not going to show it again for at least another year. There it is. Shout out to the graphics team. 4, Cody. 4, Gary. I am Adam. Enjoy the game tonight. Good luck, everybody.